All right, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler of New York, recently claimed the violence in Portland was a myth. Today, Nadler's committee, the House Judiciary Committee, held a hearing in which the Attorney General of the United States, William Barr, testified. The details of this myth were front and center as Ohio Congressman Steve Chabot asked the AG a question about Portland.
Mr. Attorney General, would it be accurate to say that it's this administration's responsibility, and of course you're part of the administration, to see that federal laws are upheld and that the federal property is secure and safe and protected? Is that correct?
That's right, Congressman. They're sort of distinct missions. One mission is to enforce federal law. And by the way, the federal government is the sovereign of the United States. We have two sovereigns here in the United States, and we enforce the federal law all over the country. Every square foot of the country, we enforce federal law. The other is protecting federal property, and specifically U.S. courthouses, which are the heart of federal property in all 93 jurisdictions in the United States. And we have the obligation to protect federal courts, and the U.S. Marshals specifically have been given that obligation. Federal courts are under attack. Since when is it okay to try to burn down a federal court? If someone went down the street to the Prettyman Court here, that beautiful courthouse we have right at the bottom of the hill, and started breaking windows and firing industrial-grade fireworks in to start a fire, throw kerosene balloons in and start fires in the court, is that okay? Is that okay now? No, the U.S. Marshals have a duty to stop that and defend the courthouse, and that's what we are doing in Portland. We are at the courthouse defending the courthouse. We're not out looking for trouble.
Thank you, General. And as far as weapons and devices that were utilized by the group of people, and you mentioned trying to destroy the courthouse. I mean, they were literally trying to burn it down and apparently didn't give a hoot about the people that were occupied in the building as well. So people were in danger.
That is absolutely right.
So as far as the weapons that you mentioned, let me get this straight. My understanding is that the people attacking the building had, among other things, rifles, explosives, knives, saws, sledgehammers, tasers, slingshots, rocks, bricks, lasers. Have I missed anything, or does that about cover it?
You have missed some things, but that's a good list.
Joining us now is the Acting Secretary of Homeland Security, Secretary Chad Wolf. Mr. Secretary, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Well, thanks, Tony. Appreciate you having me on.
So, Mr. Secretary, I'm going to jump right into the heart of this. Is the violence in Portland a myth?
Absolutely not. We see it going on for over 55 days, straight days in a row. Very, very violent activity, late at night, early in the morning. We see all of the weapons that you just highlighted in that segment. We see that and more. We see power tools, and we see accelerants. We see commercial-grade fireworks. We see a variety of weapons and tactics being used against the federal courthouse there and against our law enforcement officers. We have over around 190 law enforcement officer injuries since July 1st. So this idea that it is peaceful protesting, we do see that in Portland. We support that, but that's not what occurs in the early morning hours of every single day. We see very, very violent activity, and again, we're going to stay there. We're going to continue to protect that courthouse, and we continue to urge state and local leaders and law enforcement to do their job, to hold these people accountable. These individuals are congregating and assembling on city streets and in city parks, and they don't have a right to do that, but city officials need to hold them accountable.
Mr. Secretary, some have claimed that the protests in Portland were peaceful until the Department of Homeland Security expanded its presence and investigated the violence there.
Yeah, again, inaccurate. So thanks for bringing that up, Tony. What you hear in the news media a lot is very inaccurate statements, and they have all been debunked one way or another. So the vast majority of DHS law enforcement personnel arrived after the mayor made a statement in early July indicating that the violence in Portland had been ongoing for more than a month, and that groups continue to target the Justice Center and other buildings, and the attacks undermine public safety. That's a quote from the mayor. So that assertion is true before DHS arrived, and it's certainly true after DHS arrived. And again, this idea that simply enforcing federal law and holding criminals accountable is somehow inciting violence is a false statement, in my view, and completely inaccurate and misleading.
Well, I guess, Mr. Secretary, the response from their perspective would be we no longer enforce laws in the country? Would that eliminate violence?
That seems to be. It seems to be what they are suggesting, particularly as it relates to the federal facility, the federal courthouse there in Portland, as well as the protection of our officers. So the idea and really the atmosphere that has been fostered there in Portland is you can have a violent criminal come up to the fence line that we have put up outside the courthouse there in Portland. You can have them do any number of violent activities. You can have them throw a Molotov cocktail. You can have them throw a firework, a commercial-grade firework at a law enforcement officer's head, or a laser and try to put it in their eyes, and then step back across the street on city property and say, you can't do anything to me. We reject that notion. You have to hold people accountable. In every other city across America, it is the state and local law enforcement that help us do that job. We don't see that yet in Portland. And we're going to continue to, again, protect that courthouse, and we are making arrests. We've made over 75 arrests since the beginning of July, and we'll continue to do that to hold the criminals that are doing this accountable.
Mr. Secretary, let me ask you about that, because some have claimed that these are unidentified federal officers who are arresting people in Portland, meaning they have no uniform, no identification on.
Thanks again, Tony. So again, another myth that certain news organizations like to portray because it's easy for them. It's a talking point. We have debunked that myth. Again, we have put out pictures of the uniforms that DHS wears. We are a uniformed department and have a number of agencies that are uniformed. They are different uniforms for the different missions that they do. FPS is a blue uniform, very similar to that you would see to traditional law enforcement. But we have other uniforms, but regardless of the uniforms, they say police on the front and the back. They have a DHS patch on them, usually on their shoulder, that identifies them, not only DHS, but which agency within DHS. So it's very clearly visible, marked, and we identify ourselves. And I would just say these are individuals that have been, DHS law enforcement, have been out there, again, for 56, 57 straight nights in some cases. And the instigators, the criminals, the violent opportunists know exactly who this are. So this idea that they don't know who law enforcement is, again, is just completely inaccurate.
Now, Mr. Secretary, you've described this as kind of well-organized, well-coordinated criminal acts of violence. I mean, this cannot be considered peaceful protest. I mean, this to me appears to be domestic terrorism.
I would agree. It's absolutely not peaceful. In no circumstance that what occurs, again, early morning of every day is peaceful outside of that courthouse. To be clear, there are some peaceful protests ongoing in Portland, but they happen different time, different location. Again, no issues with that. It's the violent activity. And again, it goes back, and we had a problem in Portland back in 2018 when we had an ICE office laid siege to for over 28 days, where, again, Portland police, local leadership there did nothing to support us in trying to get people in and out of that facility. Again, we had to send in federal assets to relieve that facility. So it's an environment that they foster there. They don't enforce local or state laws. And what we've seen is now that it has gone well beyond peaceful protesting, it's gone into a violent state. And it continues to go out of control. The violent activity continues to again, spiral out of control each and every night.
Now, Mr. Wolf, I know that you've been in Homeland Security in federal office for a long time, serving under different administrations. You're not a novice. You understand the criminal mind. You understand security. If the federal government just withdrew resources from cities like Portland and other places where federal property is under attack, what would be the outcome?
Well, there in Portland, I know the outcome. The building would burn overnight. It's their stated intent. They've actually spray painted it on the side of the courthouse itself, and of course we see it on social media as well. So we have witnessed what they have tried to do. They have taken down portions of the fence when it was before it was buttressed. They've taken down portions of the fence. They've tried to wrap the fence, light it on fire, and then barricade the front door. Obviously, that's a danger to all the individuals inside that courthouse. So we know what their intent is, and if we were to withdraw, that building would burn. It's exactly what they want. It's not my mission. I'm not going to let that happen. That is the seat of justice in downtown Portland, and we need to protect that. We need to make sure that folks understand that we can disagree. We can have a civil debate, and we can do that peacefully, and we can do that night after night after night.
Yeah.
But once you cross the line and you become violent, that's when we're going to step in. We're going to protect our facilities and our law enforcement officers.
Well, Mr. Secretary, we're going to have to leave it there, but I would add that I think if you withdraw, it spreads to other cities. Thanks so much for joining us. Folks, don't go away.